My father was a devout Muslim for 50 years. He prayed 5 times a day. He fasted every Ramadan. He read the Quran in Arabic before I woke up every morning of my childhood. He never once, in my presence, said the name of Jesus as anything other than a prophet. He also hid a New Testament inside the wall of his gas station. I found it the year my Muslim marriage ended. I was 56 years old and I had nothing left. No house, no savings, no plan. And I drove 4 hours into the Blue Ridge Mountains to a building my father had been dead for 12 years. I pried open a panel behind the register and found a leather journal, some letters, and a Bible wrapped in a dish towel with his handwriting in every margin. I sat on the concrete floor of my dead father's gas station and held a Bible I had no category for. He had been reading it for decades. He had written in it. He had hidden it, and I had never known. My name is Mara Saleh. I'm 58 years old, and I grew up Muslim in Roanoke, Virginia, the daughter of a man who came from Lebanon with $30 and a mechanic's certificate and built something in the Blue Ridge that nobody expected. I was raised with the prayers, the fasting, the specific structure of a faith that I practiced the way you practice a tradition, faithfully, respectfully, without ever having been broken open by it. What I'm going to tell you is about the year Jesus broke me open. But first, I need to tell you what I was before that, because the testimony doesn't mean anything without the before. I grew up in Roanoke in a household where faith was the structure everything else was built around. My father prayed at dawn, at noon, at mid-afternoon, at sunset, at night, not performatively, quietly, in his room, the way you do something that is so fundamental to your life that you don't think about doing it, you just do it. My mother kept the fast during Ramadan, even in August when it was 90 degrees and the days were long. We went to Jummah on Fridays. We didn't eat pork. We greeted each other with the salam. These were not things we discussed. They were the weather of our house. I want to be clear. I loved this. There was real beauty in it, real warmth, real belonging. I practiced my faith sincerely for 56 years. I am not telling you a story about escaping something oppressive. I am telling you a story about a woman who went looking for an exit and found a door she didn't know existed. I'm telling it as honestly as I can, which means it is not a clean story. It is not a story where everything goes right after the conversion. It is a story where everything went wrong. And what I found inside the wrong was the one thing that held. Before you go any further, leave a comment telling me where you are watching from and what time it is there. I want to see how far this reaches. The courtroom smelled like floor cleaner and recycled air. A judge read the terms of my divorce settlement into a microphone that made his voice sound like it was coming from another room. Khalid wasn't there. He had sent his attorney, a man in a gray suit who kept checking his watch, and that absence told me everything about how Khalid had decided to categorize the previous 29 years. The attorney slid a sheet across the table. Asset schedule. The house in Roanoke's south side, Khalid's. The investment accounts, Khalid's. The retirement funds, Khalid's. The Ford F-150 we had bought for the contractor who quit after 2 weeks, mine. Personal effects, mine. And a property on Route 9 in Boone County that Khalid's lawyers had appraised at $11,000 and let me keep without any argument at all. My father's gas station, a building he hadn't touched since Yusuf Saleh died 12 years ago. I signed where the attorney pointed. 4 signatures, 2 initials, 29 years of marriage reduced to a manila folder. I walked to the parking lot and sat in the truck for a long time. I want to tell you how we got there. Not for Khalid's sake, and not to make myself sympathetic, but because the divorce didn't start with a lawyer. It started with a Bible. 2 years before the courtroom, I had driven to Boone County to check on the property. I had been avoiding it since my father died, paying the taxes without ever going, not ready to deal with whatever condition it was in. I drove up the mountain on a Tuesday afternoon, with the intention of spending 3 hours there and coming back with numbers for a real estate agent. The station was closed up and dusty, the pumps locked and rusted, kudzu working up the south wall. Inside, the air was thick with 12 years of stillness. My father's reading glasses sat on the counter next to an open crossword puzzle. I didn't touch them. I went through the building to see what needed repair, and in the back, behind the register, I found a seam in the wood paneling that didn't look accidental. The panel came away. Inside the wall was a leather journal, a metal lockbox, a bundle of envelopes, and wrapped in an old dish towel, a Bible. A paperback New Testament, the kind you find at church giveaways, worn soft at the spine and dense with handwriting in the margins. My father's handwriting. I stood there in the dimness holding it. Yusuf Saleh had been a practicing Muslim his entire adult life. He had prayed 5 times a day. He had fasted every Ramadan, gone to the mosque on Fridays, read Quran to me as a child. He had done all of this, and he had also, in secret, been reading the Gospel so many times that the pages had grown soft as cloth. I took the Bible home and put it in my nightstand drawer. I told myself I would figure out what it meant later. But that night, after Khalid was asleep, I opened it to a page my father had marked and read the verse he had underlined 3 times in blue ink. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. I closed it and lay in the dark and didn't sleep for a long time. I want to tell you what that verse felt like at 11 o'clock at night in a guest bedroom in Roanoke, Virginia. I had read it before. I knew the New Testament existed. I had encountered it academically. I was not illiterate about Christianity. But reading it that night was different from anything I can explain in terms of prior knowledge or familiarity. It felt like being addressed, not generically, specifically. Come to me, all you who are weary, not all people, not all humanity, but you, the person reading this right now, the person in this particular bed, in this particular room, in this particular exhaustion. I had been running the race my father described in his journal entry for 30 years, maintaining the house, the social calendar, the children's schedules, the faith obligations, the version of Mara Saleh that fit the life Khalid and I had built. I had been so good at running it that I had forgotten I was running. I had optimized myself into invisibility. That verse said, stop running. Come here. I will give you rest. I had not been offered rest in so long that I didn't have a category for it. Here is what weary meant in my life at 56. It meant 29 years of having been the wife of a man who was very good at building things, houses, portfolios, arguments, and who had never once asked me what I thought about any of it. Not cruelly. Khalid was not a cruel man. He was a man who had a system, and the system had worked, and I had been part of the system. I managed the house and the social obligations and the children and the faith calendar, and eventually, even those things had been optimized until they ran without much input from me. I had been agreeing for 29 years. The Bible said, "Come to me, all who are weary." I was weary, and I closed the Bible and put it back in the nightstand and didn't touch it for 3 weeks. That's the part I don't tell people right away because it doesn't fit the shape of the story they expect. I found my dead father's Bible with his handwriting in it, and I read a verse that felt like it had been written for me, and I put it away. I went back to my regular life. I made Khalid's coffee in the morning. I attended the women's prayer circle on Thursdays. I said the words I had been saying for 50 years. But the drawer was there. I knew what was in it every time I walked past. At the end of the 3 weeks, I was driving home from the grocery store on a Tuesday afternoon, and I started crying at a red light for no reason I could name. Not sad crying. The other kind. The kind that happens when something has been held back for so long that the body just decides enough. I sat at that light and cried until the car behind me honked, and I pulled into a parking lot and sat there for 20 minutes. I went home and opened the drawer. I read for 2 hours. I put the Bible back and didn't touch it for another 2 weeks. This is what the first 8 months looked like. Not a clean opening. An opening and a closing, and an opening again, over and over, like a window I didn't know whether I wanted to let air through. I told myself it was just grief. I had found my father's private writings, and I was grieving in an unusual way, and the Jesus of the Gospels was a compelling figure, even to people who weren't converting, which I was not doing. I was not converting. I said that to myself clearly and carefully more than once. But I kept going back to the drawer. I want to tell you exactly what happened in the months that followed, because this is where the testimony gets hard. I began reading in secret. At first, quietly, carefully, a few pages at a time. I read my father's journal alongside the Gospels. He had kept records of everything, every family he had quietly helped over the decades, every loan he had never called in, every free repair, every bag of groceries slipped into someone's truck. And next to each entry, he had often written a verse, not preachy, just the connection he had made between what he had done and why he was doing it. One entry from the year I was 10 years old. Fixed Tom Cavanaugh's water pump. He can't afford the part. Covered it myself. He doesn't know, doesn't need to know. Matthew 6:3. Don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Another. Paid for the Elkins girl's prescription. Told her the insurance covered it. Luke 14:13. When you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. My father had been living the Gospels for decades, but not without doubt. That is the part the journal revealed that the letter only hinted at. There are entries where Yusuf Saleh was not the quiet saint I was beginning to construct in my head. There is a February entry from 1997 where he wrote, I am tired of being two people. There is one from 2004 where he wrote, I drove past the church in Waynesboro today. Sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes. Could not make myself go in. What am I waiting for? Went home and prayed facing east and felt like a fraud. There is one from 2008, 6 months before my mother died. I have been living this way for 25 years. I still do not know if I have the right name for it. Maybe the name doesn't matter. Maybe what matters is the love. But sometimes I wonder if I have used the uncertainty as an excuse to stay comfortable. If the hiding is faith or cowardice or both. He was not resolute. He was a man who had found something true and was navigating a complicated life while trying to hold on to it. He made mistakes. He took the easier path when the harder one was available. He died with things unresolved. I found that more consoling than any version of him that was simply brave and clear. I want to tell you what the journal looked like over 4 months of reading it, because the reading was its own experience. Each entry was simple. Date, situation, action, sometimes a verse. He wrote the way he talked, direct without decoration. But what accumulated over hundreds of entries was something that changed the shape of what I understood about my father. He had fixed a widow's furnace at 2 in the morning in January and charged her nothing. He had put groceries on the tab of a young family who he knew couldn't pay and then quietly closed the tab. He had driven to a different county to anonymously pay a hospital bill. He had arrived before dawn to patch the roof of an elderly neighbor who thought the landlord had done it. And through all of it, the verses. Not every entry, but often enough that I could see the through line. Matthew 5, Matthew 25, Luke 14, John 13. The same passages repeating in different entries across different years, as if he kept returning to them the way you return to a compass bearing when you've drifted. I do not do this because I am good. He had written more than once in different variations. I do it because Christ had mercy on me first. I have no excuse not to pass it along. He had found a sentence that explained his whole life, and he had lived inside it for 40 years. My father had been living the Gospels for decades, quietly, without telling anyone, without making it a conversion narrative or a statement. He had simply encountered Jesus in those pages and let that encounter change how he moved through the world. And he had never told me. I think I understand why. In our community, in our family, in the world Khalid and I had built together, this would not have been a small thing. It would have been a crisis. He had protected me from the crisis for as long as he lived. He left me the Bible and the journal and the station, and he trusted me to find them when I needed them. I needed them at 56, sitting in my nightstand at 11 o'clock at night, reading about a man who said, "Come to me, all who are weary." In December, I almost stopped for good. Khalid found a prayer rug I had set aside. I had been praying on the couch, which was not the done thing, and he noticed the rug moved and he didn't say anything, but the noticing was visible. I felt accused of something I wasn't ready to defend. So I put the Bible in a box in the back of the closet on the highest shelf under a sweater I never wore. It stayed there for 6 weeks. In February, I got up at 2 in the morning because I couldn't sleep, and I stood in the closet in the dark and I pulled the box down. I don't know what I was looking for. I was not okay. That's the clearest way to say it. I was a 56-year-old woman standing in a closet at 2 in the morning, and I was not okay, and I had spent so long pretending I was okay that I had lost the ability to even name what not okay felt like. I opened the Bible to the page my father had marked, the same verse, the one he had underlined 3 times. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened. I will give you rest." I stood in the closet and said out loud, for the first time, "I don't know if you're real. I don't know what you are. But I am standing in a closet at 2 in the morning holding my dead father's Bible, and if you are what he believed you were, I need you to be that right now." Nothing dramatic happened. The closet stayed a closet. The house stayed quiet. But something shifted, not in the room, in me. The specific feeling of a door that has been stuck, finally giving way. I carried the Bible back to the nightstand. I didn't hide it again. By spring I was praying differently. I need to tell you about those months because they are the quietest part of the testimony and also the deepest. I had no one to talk to about what was happening. I could not go to the imam. He was Khalid's imam, our community's imam, and the conversation would not have stayed private. I could not call my brother in Detroit. He would have called our mother's grave a betrayal. I could not call my daughter Nadia because she was still in the stage of life where both parents are part of the same unit, and any crack in that unit feels like a threat. So I read alone. and I prayed alone. And I talked to Jesus the way I imagine my Father had talked to him, in the quiet of a room after everyone else was asleep, in specific and honest language without liturgy. I kept going back to Matthew 25. Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. My father had built his entire life around that verse. He had read it and understood it as a statement of presence. Jesus was in every person who needed something, waiting to be seen. The widow with the electric bill, the family who needed groceries, the child whose surgery the insurance wouldn't cover. To serve them was to serve him. I thought about my own life. What had I served? I had served a household. I had served a social position. I had served a version of faith that fit inside a performance. But had I ever looked at someone with an actual need and thought, there he is? I started to. In small ways at first and then less small. The woman at the checkout line who was counting her change. The teenager at the gas station who looked like he was trying to figure out whether to go inside. I started noticing. I started acting on the noticing. Nothing dramatic. A tank filled, a bag of groceries paid forward, a conversation held longer than was strictly necessary. It felt like stretching a muscle that had been unused for 50 years. By spring, I was praying differently. Not the Arabic recitations I had known since childhood, not those words, that structure, but something raw, something closer to what my father's journal entries sounded like. Direct, specific, honest. God, I don't know what you are. I don't know if this is real, but I am tired, and I am reading these words, and something in them feels like it was written for me specifically right now in this room. I kept the Bible in the nightstand. I kept the journal in my car. Khalid found the Bible in June. He didn't say anything right away. He set it on the kitchen counter when I came in and looked at me. I looked at him. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then he said, "How long?" "About 8 months," I said. He was quiet again. I watched him thinking. Khalid was always thinking, always calculating, always organizing information into categories that made the next decision clear. He said, "Are you becoming Christian?" I said I didn't know exactly what I was. I said I had found it in my father's things. I said something in it was reaching me in a way I had never experienced. He said, "This is not what I thought we were building." I said I understood that. He said he needed time to think. I tell you this not to make Khalid a villain. He was not a villain. He was a man who had believed we were two people living inside the same set of commitments, and he had discovered that one of us had been quietly moving outside those commitments for months without telling him. His anger was not irrational. What happened over the next 14 months I will give you briefly, because it is not the point of this testimony. But I want to give you enough to be honest, because when people hear conversion stories, they sometimes imagine a clean before and after, and this was not clean. Khalid tried. I want to say that clearly. He sat with me in our kitchen on several evenings and asked questions, real questions, not rhetorical ones. He read about Christianity, which is the kind of thing Khalid did. He researched things methodically. He spoke with our imam. He was not a man who reacted from the surface. What he couldn't get past was not the theology. It was what the Bible in the nightstand said about the previous 29 years. If I had been carrying this level of disconnection quietly for so long, if there was a version of Mara who felt weary and unseen and who had been running a race she hadn't chosen, then what were we exactly? What had we built together? He asked me that question directly one night, and I told him the truth. We had built a life that worked. It worked beautifully by every visible measure. But there was a room in me that neither of us had ever gone into, and I had been in that room alone for 30 years. That answer did not save the marriage. I don't think any answer could have. The marriage did not survive it, not because Khalid was unforgiving. He tried. But there was something that had always been hollow between us, and the Bible on the nightstand named it. I had been performing a faith and a marriage and a life for so long that when something reached me genuinely, it could not coexist with the performance. That was not Khalid's fault. It was just true. By the time I sat in that courtroom, I had been sleeping in the guest room for 7 months. The attorney slid the asset schedule across the table. Khalid got the house. I kept my father's gas station. Leave a comment right now with the word open. Just open. Because this story is about what happens when you open the thing you have been avoiding. And I want to know how many of you are already in it. I drove 4 hours into the Blue Ridge with $211 in a checking account that would soon have only my name on it. The station was smaller than I remembered. Cinder block, flat roof, 2 pump islands with rusted locks, kudzu climbing the south wall. The sign my father had painted himself, Saleh's Mountain Service, had faded to suggestions of letters. But the walls were solid. The door held. Inside, the dust and the stillness and the reading glasses on the counter beside the crossword puzzle. I had come to sell the place. That was the plan. I opened the panel and found the journal again. I had returned everything to it after that first visit, not ready to deal with what it meant. This time I sat on the floor behind the counter and read every page. My father had been helping this valley for 40 years. Names, amounts, reasons, dates. He had tracked the lives of every family on this mountain the way other people track weather. He noted when children were born, when someone lost a job, when a roof started leaking in the wrong place. He lent money that he never expected back. He repaired things for free and then noted in his journal that the person didn't know. He had paid for medical procedures, groceries, school supplies, fuel. And beside many of these entries, a verse, not always, but often. The last quarter of the journal, when the handwriting had gotten shakier and the station was slowing down, he was still at it. And 3 years before he died, I found an entry with my name. Mara called tonight. She sounds tired. It's in her voice. Not tired, like she needs sleep. Tired like she's been running a race she didn't choose and is starting to wonder when she gets to stop. I know that tired. I felt it before I found the words in Matthew. I pray she finds them. I put the Bible in the wall for whoever needs it. I think it will be her. I think she'll come back when she has nowhere else to go. I hope it doesn't cost too much to get there. I sat on the floor of my father's gas station and held that journal against my chest. I want to stay in that moment because it is the center of the testimony. He had written it 3 years before he died. He had written it knowing, the way fathers know things, that his daughter was going to need it eventually. He had not lectured me. He had not intervened. He had not called and given me his opinion of Khalid or my choices or the direction my life was taking. He had just quietly lived his life on this mountain and left a record of it and put a Bible in a wall and written a letter and trusted the road to bring me back. That is patience of a kind that I cannot fully describe. That is a faith that operates on a time scale longer than one conversation. He had watched me miss it. He had watched me run the race for decades, and he had known that the only thing that would help was something I had to find myself. He couldn't give it to me. He could only leave it where I would find it when I was ready. I was ready now. I had been stripped down to what was real: a truck, a gas station, $200, and a father's handwriting saying he had always known I would come back. There is a verse in Luke that my father had circled in the New Testament 3 times, each time with a different pen. The father sees the son coming from a long way off and runs to meet him, not walking, running. I was a long way off for a long time. He ran. He had known. He had known about me the way fathers know things they cannot say directly. He had known I was running a race I hadn't chosen. He had known I would need the Bible in the wall. He had trusted that the road would bring me back to it. I was not going to sell this place. The next morning I woke to birdsong and made coffee on the 2-burner stove in the apartment above the station, in the room where my father had slept alone for the last 20 years after my mother died. I carried the cup downstairs and walked the property. The repair bay was solid. My father had built it in the 70s and it had held. His tools were on a pegboard on the back wall, each one outlined in black marker, organized by size. The rubber grip on his favorite ratchet was worn smooth. I ran my hand along the workbench and found a groove in the wood I had made at age 9, dragging a screwdriver while he wasn't looking. He had seen it the next day. "Now the bench has character," he said. The filing cabinet in the corner of the bay held the same records as the journal, organized by family name, with follow-up notes on people he had helped. He had tracked them for decades without their knowing, patched a roof under cover of night, slipped money into a glove compartment, driven to a school in the next county to pay for a uniform. He had done it all because of what he believed. And what he believed had come from those pages he had found in a used Bible at a flea market in 1983, according to an entry I found later. A man from Lebanon who had prayed 5 times a day his whole adult life had read about a Jewish carpenter who said, "Come to me, all who are weary," and had recognized something he had been looking for. He hadn't changed religions in any official way. He had just met someone in a book and tried to live the way that person lived. The first neighbor came the second day. A man named Earl Bowen, heavyset and weathered, drove up in an old Chevy and stood in front of the station staring at it with his hands on his hips. He looked at me for a long moment. "You're Yusuf's daughter," he said. It wasn't a question. He pulled 2 ceramic mugs and a thermos from his truck and poured coffee without asking. They sat on overturned buckets on the cracked concrete. "Tell me about him," I said. "Tell me the things he didn't tell me." Earl looked at the mountains for a while. "Your daddy couldn't stand to see somebody struggling if he had 2 hands and a set of wrenches. I caught him loading groceries into the Elkins family's truck at midnight once. He said he was reorganizing his inventory, reorganizing it right into their back seat." I laughed, the kind of laugh that surprises you. Earl said, "Why didn't he tell anyone?" He thought about it, turning the mug. "Because he didn't think it needed a name," Earl said. "He thought it was just what you did when you lived somewhere and had more than nothing. He didn't think it was special." He paused. "The thing is, it was." 3 days later, a truck limped into the lot in the late afternoon with steam rising from the hood. The driver was a young man, 22, maybe 23, lean and sun-dark in a gray t-shirt with grease stains on the front. He climbed out and popped the hood and stared at the engine with the focused calm of someone who knew exactly what was wrong and also knew he didn't have the tools to fix it. I walked over. "Upper radiator hose," I said. He looked at me. He had a face that was already used to people declining to help him, that specific set to the jaw that comes from knowing the odds in advance. "I've got a spare in the back," he said. "Just need the tools." "I've got tools," I said. "Pull it in if it'll make it." His name was Cal Denton. He had the hose swapped in 6 minutes, clean and exact, nothing wasted. I watched his hands and saw my father's hands. "Where'd you learn to wrench?" I asked. "My uncle's shop in Galax. I worked there summers until I was 16. He tightened the last clamp and stepped back, checking his work. "I'm reopening this station," I said. "I need someone who knows engines." He looked at me the way people look when they have been disappointed enough times that they have stopped taking offers at face value. "You don't know me. I know you replaced that hose faster than most mechanics with twice your experience. That's enough for today." He didn't say yes. He poured coolant into the radiator, started the engine, listened to it run. "I'll think about it," he said. "Come back tomorrow if you decide," I told him. "I'll have coffee on." He drove off down Route 9. I went back inside and sat with my father's Bible and the journal and the bundle of letters he had kept. Thank you notes from families he had helped, written on notebook paper and the backs of receipts. Simple letters from people whose lights had stayed on because of him, whose cars had run another winter because of him, whose children had eaten because of him. He had never shown them to anyone. I was sitting there in the quiet of that when I found the last envelope. It was sealed and unaddressed except for one word in his careful block letters. "Mara." I slid my finger under the flap. 2 pages of yellow legal paper, folded in thirds. The handwriting was shakier than the early journal entries, but still his. "Dear Mara," it began. "If you're reading this, you found your way back. I always knew you would." I pressed my back against the counter. "I want you to know something about this station. It isn't worth anything on paper. A bank would call it a liability, but it is worth everything to the people who depend on it. Not because of the gas or the repairs, though those matter, because someone is behind the counter, because the coffee is on and the light is on and the door is open. I kept the books you'll find in the cabinet and behind the register. I wrote it all down because I wanted someone to understand what this place was for. I hoped that someone would be you. I know about your marriage. I've known for a long time. You hit it well, but a father sees what a father sees. Khalid is not a bad man, Mara. He measures everything in dollars and mistakes that for understanding value. Someday you'll see the difference. I hope it doesn't cost too much to learn it. I also know what I left in the wall. I left it for you specifically. I found those words 40 years ago, and they changed how I moved through every day for the rest of my life. I never told your mother. I never told you. I should have. But I was afraid. I want to be honest with you about the fear because you deserve the whole truth and not a cleaned-up version of your father. I was afraid of what the community would say. I was afraid of your mother's face. I was afraid of the imam, who was a good man, but who would have found a way to see this as betrayal. I was afraid of your brother, who was already having a hard enough time finding his footing and didn't need his father upending the ground underneath him. I was afraid that if I said it out loud, I would lose the only world I had built. So I kept quiet. I told myself that living it was enough, that the Father who sees in secret already knew, that the kindness was the testimony and the testimony didn't need words. And that was true, but it was also a coward's bargain. Because the other truth is this: I was ashamed, not of what I had found. I was never ashamed of that. I was ashamed that I had found it and couldn't say it. Every year that passed made it harder to say. Every prayer at the mosque, every Eid, every time I watched you and your brother grow up inside the same structure I was secretly questioning, I kept thinking, next year. When things settle, when the moment is right, the moment was never right, and then it was too late. I have spent the last years of my life carrying that, not the faith, the hiding. The hiding is the thing I regret. If I had told you, maybe the road would have been shorter for you. Maybe you wouldn't have had to find it alone in a drawer at midnight in a guest bedroom. Maybe it wouldn't have cost you what it cost you. I don't know. I'll never know. What I know is that I left you the best thing I had, and I should have handed it to you instead of hiding it in a wall. Forgive me, Mara, not for what I believed, for the years I was too afraid to tell you. But Mara, if you are standing in this building reading this letter, then the secret is out. You know who I was, and you are going to have to decide who you will be. The station is yours, not because it's worth money, but because you are the only person I trust to understand what it was for. Keep the coffee on. That matters more than you think. Your father, Yusuf. I folded the letter and held it in my hands for a long time. Outside, the mountains went dark against a sky full of stars. He had lived the Gospels for 40 years. He had loved his neighbor not as a program or a philosophy, but as the most natural extension of what he had found in those pages. A love so specific, so personal, so willing to cost something real that it had changed the entire valley around him without anyone knowing why. He had left me the same invitation. I want to tell you about the months that followed because the testimony doesn't end in the station. It goes on into the hard parts, and the hard parts are where it becomes real. Cal came back the next morning. He worked for a week, then another. He took the spare room upstairs without a word of protest after I pointed out that nobody sleeps well in a truck. He organized the tools back to their outlines on the pegboard. He never quoted more than a job was worth and never turned someone away because the work was too small. Earl Bowen came most mornings with materials and experience and the stubborn patience of a man who had known my father for 30 years and was not about to stop showing up now. The community came, slowly at first, then steadily, the way things come back to a place once people believe the place is real again. An elderly couple drove 40 minutes to get gas when there were 3 stations between their house and mine because they had been stopping at Saleh's mountain service since 1987, and they weren't going to stop now that someone was there again. They sat on the porch for an hour and told me stories I had never heard. My father as a young man, thin and always with grease under his nails, learning English with a dictionary behind the register, going through 2 dictionaries the first year because he wore them out. A woman named Patricia stopped one Thursday with a casserole and a note that said, "Welcome home, Yusuf's daughter." I didn't know her. She said my father had shown up at her house in February 2003 during the ice storm with salt and firewood. She had never asked him to. He had just appeared. A man named Curtis came by specifically to talk. He said my father had lent him $50 in 1999 during the worst month of his life. The amount was nothing by any financial measure. But Curtis said that $50 was the thing that kept him from making a decision he couldn't take back. He had been carrying that for 22 years, and he wanted me to know. Each person who stopped at the station was carrying something my father had done, which meant each person was carrying a piece of a man I had thought I knew and had not known at all. That was the thing I had not understood about the journal until the people came and made it real. The journal was not a record of charity. It was a record of presence. My father had been present to every person who needed him, and presence is not abstract. It has faces and specific mournings and exact amounts and real consequences that live in people's bodies decades later. I had not been present to anyone in 29 years. I had been efficient. I had been organized. I had managed things well. But presence is different. The community came slowly, the way community comes when it believes something is worth coming to. An elderly woman stopped by and paid for her gas and then sat on the porch and told me about the time my father fixed her car on Christmas Eve and wouldn't charge her because he said it was technically a holiday and he didn't work holidays. A man drove 40 minutes past a newer shop because he trusted a place with my father's name on it. A teenage girl dropped off a bag of groceries, waved shyly, and drove away before I could say anything, each one carrying something my father had done that he had never told anyone about. 8 weeks after I reopened the station, an envelope came from Khalid's attorneys. He had heard about a highway expansion being planned through the county. His lawyers were filing a motion to reopen the settlement on the grounds that the property had been undervalued. They wanted their share. I sat with the letter at the counter next to my father's reading glasses. I didn't have a lawyer. I had $11 over the fuel payment in the station account and a truck with 160,000 miles on it. The next morning, Earl Bowen came in and looked at the letter. He set his mug down. "There's a woman in Staunton," he said, "retired attorney, moved up from Richmond 6 years ago." He paused, turning the mug. "Her daughter was sick when she was little, needed surgery the insurance wouldn't cover. Your daddy paid for it, $3,200 out of the station's earnings, never said where it came from. You think she'd help?" Earl pulled out his phone. "I think if you tell her you're Yusuf Saleh's daughter and your ex-husband is trying to take what Yusuf left you, she'll be here by tomorrow." She arrived the next morning in a gray sedan, and she walked up the porch steps like a woman who had been expecting a call like this for years. She introduced herself, Patricia Webb. She said Earl had told her about me, years before my father died, that Yusuf's daughter was living a hard life and didn't know it yet. I said I didn't know he had told anyone about me. She said he didn't tell anyone much, but he talked to me a little. After I found out it was him who paid for my daughter's surgery, I started coming by for coffee. We talked on this porch for about 3 years before he died. She set her briefcase on the counter. He was a complicated man in a simple way, she said. Worked hard, kept his head down, couldn't stand to see somebody struggle if he could do something about it. She paused. He told me once that he had read a verse that said, "Whatever you do to the least of these, you do to me." He said after he read it, he couldn't unread it. She opened the briefcase and took out the motion. She read it the way experienced attorneys read things, without drama, turning pages with the specific calm of someone who has seen variations of this for 40 years. When she finished, she took off her reading glasses. "Nuisance claim," she said. "They're betting you can't afford to fight it. That's the whole strategy." She went through the documents in the filing cabinet. The original deed from 1974. My father's will notarized and witnessed, leaving the property solely to me. The chain of title from his father to him and from him to me, never commingled with marital funds. His own lawyers appraised it and dismissed it, she said. "That's their problem, not yours. Motion will be dismissed." She stood and picked up her briefcase. "What do I owe you?" I asked. She looked at me for a moment. "Your father paid for my daughter's heart surgery when I couldn't." She pressed her lips together. "He never told me it was him. I found out 3 years later, and by then he was already gone. She picked up her briefcase. There's nothing you owe me. This was paid for a long time ago. She left her card on the counter and drove away. I need to tell you about Cal because his part of this is the part I think about most. He was in the bay one afternoon when I heard the sounds of work stop. Not the silence of someone taking a break, the weighted silence of someone who has gone still with something. I walked to the bay door. He was sitting on a milk crate holding an open folder, staring at it. The folder was labeled Denton. Inside was a single sheet in my father's careful block letters. Clara Denton, it read. Surgery fund. Heart valve replacement. August 1992. Paid through the clinic as anonymous donation. Do not let her know where it came from. Below it, in the same hand. I do not do this because I am good. I do it because Christ had mercy on me first, and I have no excuse not to pass it along. Cal's hands were shaking. My grandmother, he said. His voice was tight in the way of someone holding themselves together by will. She always said someone paid for her surgery. She looked for that person for the rest of her life. He looked up at me. She told me that story every time I came to visit. She said whoever paid for that surgery was the reason our whole family existed. He closed the folder carefully and set it on his knees. He never knew me. He never knew I'd exist. But the reason I'm sitting here is because a man running a gas station on a road nobody uses decided to pay for a stranger's operation. He stood up and put the folder back in the cabinet. He went back to work. But he stayed later than usual, and when he locked up the bay, he cleaned each tool and returned it to its outlined space on the pegboard with the care of someone handling something that belonged to a person they wished they had known. The hearing was on a Thursday. Khalid's attorney made arguments about speculative future value. The judge reviewed the deed, the will, the chain of title, the settlement appraisal that Khalid's own lawyers had signed. Motion denied, the judge said. Property was never marital. This matter is closed. I walked to the truck in the courthouse parking lot. Khalid was on the steps behind me. I turned. He looked different from the last time I had seen him. Not defeated. Just tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hearing. When did you become this person? He asked. I looked at him for a moment. He was not asking it with contempt. That surprised me. The Khalid who had come to the station 3 weeks earlier had been calculating, armored. This was something different. He was asking because he actually wanted to know. I looked at him. The man I had married at 29. The man who built things with the specific confidence of someone who had always known what things were worth. And I said, I always was, you just never looked. He was quiet. Something moved behind his eyes that I didn't have a name for. Then he said something I hadn't expected. He said, I went to the station last week after the hearing was scheduled. I drove up the mountain. I didn't say anything. He said, there were people on the porch, just sitting there, and that young man was in the bay, and the sign was on, and it looked like... He stopped. He said, it looked like the kind of place where things still work the way they used to. I said, that's what my father built. He nodded slowly. He looked at the courthouse steps. He said, I've been thinking about the journal. Nadia told me about it, what he did, all those years. He turned his sunglasses in his hands. He said, I don't know what to do with that yet. I don't know what I believe about any of it. But I think I was wrong that it was nothing. That was the most Khalid could give in that moment. It was not conversion, not confession, not apology. It was a door open 1 inch. In 29 years of marriage, he had never opened that door at all. I said, that's enough for now. I drove home. The word came without any effort at all. Home. I want to tell you something about my father's faith before I close, because it is the center of everything. He was never, as far as I know, formally baptized. He never joined a church, never made a public declaration, never changed the label anyone used for him. He was Yusuf Saleh, a Lebanese immigrant Muslim from Roanoke, Virginia, and that is how people knew him. But he had found Jesus in a paperback at a flea market in 1983, and from that point forward, the man running the gas station on the mountain had been quietly living out the Sermon on the Mount for 40 years, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, visiting the sick, doing it all in secret, attributing it in his journal to the one he had found in those pages. I do not tell you this to make a theological argument about what my father was. I have been asked this question many times in the years since. What was he? Was he Muslim or Christian? Did he convert? What label applies? And the honest answer is that I don't know exactly. And I have come to think that he didn't much care about the label. He had found something in those pages that changed him. He had recognized in Jesus the God who sees in secret, who says the poor will always be with you and you should love them, who touches the untouchables and feeds the 5,000 from 5 loaves and says, "Come to me when you are weary." He recognized him. That was enough. I think of Abraham, who trusted a voice that told him to leave everything and go to a place he couldn't see yet. Abraham didn't have a denomination. He had a response. My father had a response. He spent 40 years living it out on a mountain road, and the mountain road is still running with the current of what he built. I tell you this because it is the truest thing I know about who Jesus is. He shows up in used paperbacks and mountain gas stations and the private journals of immigrants who never told anyone what they had found. He shows up in the tiredness of a woman at midnight in a guest bedroom who has been performing a life for 30 years and has finally run out of performance. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened. My father heard it. He spent 40 years passing it along. I am trying to do the same thing. I live above the station now. I want to tell you what it looks like to run a station the way my father ran it, because it is different from what I expected. The difference is that you are always watching, not in a surveillance sense, in the sense of actually seeing the people who come through. There is a particular look that I have learned to recognize. It is not the look of someone who is struggling dramatically. It is the quieter look of someone who has been managing something for a long time and is running close to the edge of what they can manage. The specific set of the jaw, the eyes that go to the total on the pump before anything else. When I see that look, I do what my father did. I fill the tank and tell them to pay when they can. I slip a note in the glove box. I do the brake job for the cost of the parts. I do not do this because I am good. I do it because I was on the other side of it for a long time, and someone I never met paid for a stranger's surgery, and that stranger eventually worked in my repair bay, and I am alive today, partly because my father believed that Christ's mercy should not stop with the person who receives it. It should pass along. That is the whole economy of what my father built. Not charity, transmission, the pumps run, the bay stays busy. Cal is enrolled in a certification program and studies diesel diagnostics at the counter after hours in the same focused way my father used to read his Bible. Earl Bowen comes most mornings. The porch has become a gathering place. My daughter Nadia came in the spring with her children. She stood in the doorway of the bay and watched me show her son how to check tire pressure, and I saw on her face the exact moment she stopped worrying about me. We sat on the porch that evening, and she said, "I was wrong about all of it. I didn't say anything. She said, "Dad called me last week. He sounded different." "What did he say?" "He asked about you. He wanted to know how you were." "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That you were better than anyone expected. That you had turned into someone he never imagined you could be." She paused. I told him that was because he never tried to imagine it. She picked up her mug. "He asked me something else. He asked me if I thought Earl Yusuf," she still called him that. She had always called her grandfather Earl Yusuf as a small child, and it stuck. "If I thought he was at peace." I asked what she told him. She said she told him she thought Earl Yusuf was very much at peace, and she thought the station was proof of it. She looked at the mountains. Dad said, "Maybe that's what it is, proof." She met my eyes. "He's still working it out." "But he's working it out, Mom. That's different from where he was a year ago." I squeezed her hand and let the quiet do the rest. My father's reading glasses are still on the counter beside the unfinished crossword puzzle. 27 across is filled in. 28 across is still blank. I leave them that way. Every morning I come downstairs and make coffee on the same 2-burner stove my father used for 20 years, in the apartment where he slept alone after my mother died, and prayed at dawn facing the mountains. I bring the cup downstairs and unlock the front door and stand in the doorway for a minute before the first car pulls in. Some mornings it is just the road and the ridgeline and the bird song and the smell of damp oak, and I think about how many mornings my father stood in this same doorway, coffee in hand, watching the same road, before I was born and after I stopped calling as often as I should have. He stood here every morning and practiced being present, and then went back inside and was present to whoever walked through the door. I am learning to do the same thing. Every morning I come downstairs and make coffee, and open the station and stand in the doorway for a minute before the first car pulls in. I look at the mountains and I think about a man who found 3 words in a used paperback and spent 40 years trying to live up to them. Come to me. He came. And 40 years later, when I finally ran out of everything else, I came too. Write open in the comments. Just open. I want to say something to the people watching this who are where I was, not at the gas station, but at the nightstand, reading something in secret, carrying something you haven't told anyone. You are not alone in that room. I was alone in it for almost 2 years, reading, praying, trying to understand what was happening, no one to talk to, no way to know if what I was feeling was real or if it was just the particular loneliness of a woman in the wrong half of a marriage, reaching for something to hold. It was real, not because of anything I did, not because I was righteous or brave or deserving of anything special. I was a tired woman reading a verse her dead father had underlined 3 times. There was nothing extraordinary about me. But the invitation is not conditional on being extraordinary. Come to me, all who are weary, all, not the faithful, not the deserving, not the ones whose theology is sorted out, all. I was weary. I came. That is the whole story. If you are carrying the Bible or the conversation or the prayer that you haven't shown anyone yet, keep carrying it. Keep reading. Keep praying in your own broken language. Keep going back to the verse that felt like it was written for you. He knows which room you're sitting in. He has been patient with me through all the years I was performing a faith instead of living one. Through all the years I was running a race I hadn't chosen and calling that devotion. Through all of it. He is patient with you too. The door is open. Come. There is one more thing I want to say about my father and what he was. He was a Lebanese immigrant who came to the Blue Ridge in 1971 with $30 and a mechanic's certificate, and a faith he had practiced carefully for 50 years. He is buried in a Muslim cemetery in Roanoke under a stone with his name in Arabic. He was also a man who found the Gospels at a flea market in 1983 and read them until they were soft, and spent the next 27 years trying to live the way the person in those pages lived. I don't know what to call what he was. I only know what he did. He loved his neighbor, specifically, consistently, at cost, without telling anyone, for 40 years on a mountain road in Virginia. And when I came back to that road with nothing left, I found that everything he had done was still there, still alive, still moving through the community he had loved. Patricia Webb had kept his number until the day he died. Earl Bowen still brought firewood because Yusuf had reshingled his roof in 1998. Cal Denton was alive because of a surgery my father paid for before Cal was born. The bread he had cast upon the waters had been floating there for decades, waiting for me to arrive. I came back weary and broke and alone, and the mountain received me the way it had received him, because he had spent 40 years teaching it how. He found a verse. He lived it. I found the record of the living. I came home. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, in a nightstand drawer at 11 o'clock at night, the same invitation my father had received arrived in my hands. Come to me, all who are weary. I was weary. I came. He was already there, right open in the comments. Let me see how far this is reaching today. May Jesus walk with you today and in every day that is still ahead of you. Amen.